One of the most subversive observations of Vatican Council II may have been the following: since the ultimate norm of religious life is the following of Christ as given us in the Gospel, this is to be held by all institutes at the supreme rule. Footnote 27. And there's a reference there to Perfecti Caritatis in the documents of Vatican II, edition Walter M. Abbott, New York, 1966, 468, number 2. The law is there to help us draw closer to Christ and live up to His gospel. When it grows to be in the way, you drop it. I know there were a good many among you through the centuries who cheerfully acted on that truth anyway. It must be difficult for a younger generation to imagine how some of you used to view the gospel through the lenses of the scholastic categories and theology manuals, and not the other way around. A Pelagian asceticism cannot stand long in the presence of the gospel. It is seen for what it is, and it crumbles in the light. Besides, as depressing climate, its mean apprehension of God, its meagre hopes and small expectations, its inhumanity and pessimism about what is in humanity, its capacity to induce a permanent aridity of the spirit, its opening to desolation, its anxieties and stresses could not long survive the largeness of mind and the generosity of heart perceived in Lumen Gentium and in its treatment of holiness. Footnote 28. Reference to Lumen Gentium, chapter 5, and documents of Vatican II, paragraphs 65 to 72. It could not long survive the largeness of mind and the generosity of heart perceived in Lumen Gentium and in its treatment of holiness. Looking on this last half century, I think it is probable that the change with the most revolutionary consequences was the discovery that one could respectfully use the word experience. Those of you born in recent decades probably cannot conceive how it was before your time. No one imagined that experience might have anything to say to the beautiful theological aridities of those days. The academic orthodoxy then prevalent frowned on the word if it ever entered their ken. But you take it for granted that making the exercises depends on one's being able to articulate what God is working in a person's spirit. It seems incredible now that the experience should have been a bad word in any Jesuit theologian. The dynamic of the exercises is connected with the ability to be aware of what is happening in the spirit and to reflect on those subjective realities with the help of the one giving the exercises. One of you, now a cardinal, has pointed out how both Friar Karl Rahner and Friar Bernard Lonergan found the root of their theology in the experience of the exercises. Footnote 29. Rahner characterized his own theology as an attempt to spell out the implications of the experience of the Holy Spirit that Saint Ignatius wished to deepen and clarify through spiritual exercises. The experience of being in love with God, according to Lonergan, corresponds to Saint Ignatius Loyola's consolation that has no cause. Cardinal Avery Dulles, S.J., Jesuits in Theology, Yesterday and Today, Theological Studies, 52, 1991, 524. By the time of Vatican II, some of you had begun to take seriously my directives about giving the exercises. There had always been an awareness that it was an adaptation of the exercises to give them to groups with a number of lectures each day. There was a kind of floating assumption that to give them to one person at a time was not practicable. You have discovered that it is remarkable what you learn about the ways of God when you spend time each day with one exercitant, listening to his or her experience and seeking God and trying to discern together where it may seem the Spirit is leading. When God discloses the variety of his ways with human lives, the trim garden paths of the spiritual treatises begin to look unreliable. You are brought to wonder at the largest and generosity of God's ways. He discloses himself as the sovereign master of what he does. He is not confined by your categories. He is no respecter of your refined distinction or labels. He makes your cautions look shabby For each he has his own pace. He ignores your maps and schedules. You begin to see methods of prayer as what they are, useful devices that may or may not be suitable to open this or that person to God's actions or God's action. Some of the venerable generalizations of the tradition are seen to be useful, some false, some pointless. All that discovery and experience began to spell the end of rationalism and spirituality, the poor relation of a rational theology, if that is, rationalism can be taken to mean a mistrust of subjectivity and a simple faith in rationality. In those pre-Vatican II days, it was as though objectivity and reason could save us from the illusions that attend upon feelings that hover around the ignis fatuus of the imagination. Reason would defend us against the subterfuges of self-deception. I do not recall now that it was ever observed, something you directors of the exercises observe so often that you perhaps hardly reflect on it, that rationality is the stoutest ally in the cause of evading painful decisions as the chief tool of the self-serving spirit. Rationality needs, even more than do the heart and the imagination, to be purified. The change with the most revolutionary consequences was the discovery that one could respectably use the word experience. Yes, I know, I taught you to reverence the intelligence. I hope you will never lose hold of that. But I wrote in one of my letters, for it may often be that those things which do not seem to fit in at all with human prudence are perfectly compatible with the divine prudence, for the divine prudence cannot be bounded by the laws of our reasonings. Footnote 30. See Hugo Rana, S.J., Ignatius the Theologian, London 1968, 225. No se ata a las leyes de nuestras razones. Rana here cites a letter of Ignatius to the Duke of Alba in Sancti Ignati de Loyola Epistolae et Instructiones, Volume 11, Volume 40 of MHSI, Rome, 1958. Your experience has shown you, surely, that if abstractions are to be your servants and not your masters, you need constantly to bring them into friendly encounter with experience. You have to check them out continually and adjust them in the light of the real. Otherwise, they take on too easily a little of their own and too much determine how you see reality. Attention to experience too, and reflection on it, especially as you give the exercises, begin to dissolve the inherited burden of Pelagianism. Very well. Go ahead and put that word in quotation marks. Take it as a useful enough label to cover as well as prevailing wind of neo-Augustinian pessimism. Even a small presence to the power and generosity of God's action in a person begins to dissipate the clouds of pessimism about human nature that long had been looming over spirituality in the religious climate of those last 400 years. The kind of fear and mistrust masquerading as a wise prudence is seen to beget pusillanimity, a small-minded placing of human limitations on the power of God, a timid hedging around of a person's expectations of how God desires to act and how generous is his bounty. I had hoped that when you had all finished making the exercises, you would have found a permanent joy in pondering with deep affection how the Lord desires to give himself to me. SPX 234. Before the mid-1960s, the dominant orthodoxy did not encourage you to use the word contemplation. Once, when Friar James Walsh, the only begetter of the Way, was working toward his doctorate in Rome in the early 1950s, at the end of a seminar on late medieval writers, he asked the presiding professor, "Isn't it clear that the use of the term contemplation is what Ignatius meant by..." The professor replied, not quite, looking over his shoulder, "Yes, of course, but you can't say so." Now, at any rate, you can speak more freely. Some of you, indeed, may say too freely, given the rapid deterioration of the currency of good words in the field of spirituality these days. We may feel that the words like mystical are too cheaply used. Footnote 31. De Guibert, almost one might think, echoing Melchior Cano's words, wrote, no doubt, just like so many spiritual writers of other schools, more than one Jesuit also has written about facile paths to union and the shortened roads to the love of God. De Guibert, Spiritual Doctrine, 572. Be that as it may, it can happen that while making the exercises, a person becomes aware that something has intervened, aware of having received something given. In the vocabulary I was able to use in the 1500s, that would coincide with what I mean, or what I meant by consolation. SPX 316, footnote 32. Asked what he meant by consolation, Saint Ignatius said of himself that it was something that he sensed in himself that was not his own, nor could be his own, but was purely from God. Reported by Pedro de Ribadeneira, de Actus P. Ignati, and Fontes Narrativi de S. Ignatio de Loyola, FN, edited edition Candidas de Dalmases, Volume 2 of Monumenta Ignatiana, Volume 73 of the MHSI, Rome, 1951, 338. All that is no more than to say that when you begin to attend what actually happens in persons under the working of grace, you discover the importance of not interfering. SPX 15. I said, didn't I, that I wanted you as far as possible to be free in all your activities, at ease in yourselves, and obedient to the light given particularly to each one of you. Footnote 33. FN 1, semicolon 357. It was a letter to Francis Borgia that I wrote. God sees what is best for each one, and knowing all things, he shows each on the road to take and helps with grace to follow it. But a man may need time before he discovers, perhaps by trial and error, his own special way to God, the surest and the happiest for him in this life. Footnote 34. Letter 466 in S. Ignati de Loyola Espatolae et Instructiones, Volume 2, Volume 26 of MHIS Rome, 1964, 236. For an English translation of this letter, see William J. Young, S.J., Letters of St. Ignatius of, it's probably a translation, Letters of St. Ignatius of Loyola, Chicago, 1959, 181. Okay, and he continues to talk to them, or it seems that he's talking to these other Jesuits throughout this book. There's plenty more pages on that. We're going to jump a couple of chapters to see if there's anything else that stands out. You cannot be more free than to choose what is more according to the mind of Christ. And here's Appendix 1, a perspective. Germany, 1547. Bobadilla increased his trips, his interference, his outbursts and his criticisms. His activity was effective because he had very clear perception of situations, a single-minded zeal and dauntless courage. He refused to despair and shared his hopes with others. Rome, 1552. The constitutions began to be known in certain regions. A certain picking and choosing was at work among the companions, but the majority entered fully into their spirit. In other places, Ignatius was obliged to intervene to recall some to obedience, to poverty, and to community life. He did so with lucidity and tenacity. 1552, overly lenient recruitment in certain regions concerned Ignatius. The need for men caused haste and a lack of rigour that were contrary to the bonum commune of the society. Italy, 1552, when Ignatius recalled to Fro, Lyonnaise protested and Ignatius reacted, which resulted in admirable letters from both of them. In the name of Ignatius, Palanco wrote to Lyonnaise, the chaff is mixed with good grain, even in the society. The Lord knows those who belong to him, and those alone constitute the society. Italy 1553. For the colleges it was a difficult year as a result of poverty that bordered on abject misery. Lyonnaise, sick, overburdened with work and worry, and it must be said, tired of the spiritual mediocrity of certain subjects, whom Rome sent him, who soon would leave or be discharged, was driven to the point of asking Ignatius to relieve him of his duties as provincial. Cologne 1552. Kessel, called to profession, went to his own country on family business. When he returned, he found his fold, or his flock, in revolt. He dismissed 9 of his 14 companions. Italy 1554. Rodriguez, forbidden to re-enter Portugal and deprived of the authorization he had obtained from the Grand Penitentiary to live in hermitage, exempt from all obedience to Ignatius, and the society began a painfully errant and erratic life. India 1554. Conditions were hard. The companions were overworked. The new viceroy reduced the allocation of money to the missionaries, an action that put certain charitable works and houses in difficulty. Friar Balthazar Diaz was a man of great faith, and he boosted the morale of his companions. It is in weakness, he reminded them, that God shows his strength. Footnote 55. Taken directly from André Ravier, and this is book in French, the title in French. This book is available in an English translation. Ignatius of Loyola and the founding of the Society of Jesus, San Francisco, 1987. And second appendix. And it makes mention of the portrait de Guibert draws of Saint Ignatius, and of a spirit was bold enough for its time. After all, de Guibert had been the first in 1938 to publish a monograph on the fragment of Saint Ignatius's diary of 1544-45. There he had not only shown Ignatius to be a mystic, led by God in ways of infused contemplation to the same degree, though not in the same manner as a Saint Francis of Assisi or a Saint John of the Cross, but he had given us a language in which to begin to understand the significant difference between the nature of Ignatius's mystical graces and those of Saint John of the Cross or of Saint Francis. It was no longer possible to assume that the contemplative journey is all of one kind. It has been pointed out that de Guibert gives us a domesticated saint, finicky about observance, meticulous about rules in common life. There is no sense of the magnanimity of vision, of the daring and enterprise, of the urgency of mission. There is a curious hiatus between the saint's interior life and the work he did, the first naturally looming larger. Questions that de Guibert could well have asked about the intrinsic relationship of the saint's mysticism and mission remains simply unasked. Double authorship. The third part of the history, written when the author was presumably a sick man and left unrevised upon his death in 1942, consists of an extended essay on the specific characteristics of Jesuit spirituality. It is here that the double authorship stands out and distorts the reality. There is, for example, a good section on the ways in which Jesuit authority have treated, Jesuit authors. A good section on the ways in which Jesuit authors have treated questions of contemplative prayer and infused graces. De Guibert knew well the strong current of personal mystical experience and teaching on contemplation found among the Spanish Jesuits from the 1570s. On Antonio Cordeses plus 1601, Balthazar Alvarez plus 1580, Diego Alvarez de Paz 1620, Luis de la Puente 1624. De Guibert had been one of the founders of Revue de Esthétique et de Mystique in 1920, and of the Dictionnaire de Spiritualité and had been among the French scholars who were quietly producing monographs on these matters half a century before Vatican Council II. Nevertheless, while traversing this terrain in the history, the writer strikes a marked note of caution of not wanting to raise his voice too loud. The second author, the ascetic de Guibert, speaks in a different tenor. He sets out to defend Jesuit spirituality against the charges of being a moralism, overly rationalist, voluntarist, Pelagian. The terms in which he conducts the defence confirm the case made by the prosecution. And so forth. If we are dominated by the love of Christ, we shall spontaneously take on his thoughts and tastes. We shall judge and act according to the example he has given. St. Francis de Sales' affectionate comparison is well known. On entering into the soul, charity, like the queen bee, brings her whole people with her. That is the whole troop of other virtues whose queen she is. Okay, in the next paragraph, the author wrestles with himself and returns to the claim that nowhere in his spiritual direction and counsels is Saint Ignatius satisfied with the indirect struggle against faults. 570. It is a prescription for self-absorption. That alone is enough to explain why many religious may have taken refuge in a healthier way of living, in activism. No easy way. Two rhetorics are at work. There are two languages, each issuing from a different kind of experience and from different presuppositions. It is as though the ascetic is afraid to concede that God might have his own gentler ways of drawing people into union with him. De Guibert concedes that there have indeed been Jesuits who have advocated a less grim way of Christian living. No doubt, just like so many spiritual writers of other schools, more than one Jesuit also has written about facile paths of union and the shortened roads to the love of God. 572. It would be dreadful to leave the reader with the impression that the way to God might be enjoyable. At one point, the ascetic, who is concerned at all costs to defend the grim version of Jesuit spirituality, sets out to refute the imputation of Pelagianism by the astounding argument that the spirituality could not have been semi-Pelagian because Jesuit theologians taught a sound theology of grace, as though the one had necessarily anything to do with the other. 570. Friar Paul Dudon, in commenting on the instructive affair of Friar Balthasar Alvarez, whose practice of direction was delated to the general in Rome by the watchdogs of authenticity, and who was forbidden to pray contemplatively or to recommend effective prayer to others, observes that in these matters it is easy to be wrong when the only ground for one's judgment is une science livresque, footnote 56. P. Dudon, in his book there, 1573, 1578, RAM 2, 1921, 56. And here is past issue studies in the spirituality of Jesuits, and you probably could have bought some of those, as it suggests here. The prices at that time, there's a hell of a lot of them. A new book, The Road from La Storta, and other information. So we've basically covered this book of what supposedly Saint Ignatius asked, what he stated, and what he saw, and how he dealt with it. What he saw, what he came to realise, and what he supposedly did in regards to it. So we hope you found that really interesting. Rather long, but interesting. Which may give you two sides of every coin, right? It may give you a new perspective on the Jesuits and what they're really like, according to Saint Ignatius, who was appointed Jesuit Superior General. According to this book. Yeah, so we've already put up a video which is basically the negative, the supposed conspiracy, secret plan of the Jesuit order. But through this book we've looked at Saint Ignatius's views, the negatives of what he saw and he commented on, and he strived to turn into a positive. But at the end of the day, it's up to you, the individual viewer, reader, listener of this book, of this information, to decide, are they really part of a secret, evil, dastardly plot to rule the world and so forth, as mentioned in our other video. Because it could be just a conspiracy theory or false claims, falsifications. The order may not actually be like that. Once somebody says something, it becomes conspiracy theory. It becomes, the truth. But you have to do the personal research, etc. Sift it, all the information with a giant sifter, as we can best put it, to find out what's really going on with this order. You could even probably, if you knew somebody that was in this order, and they openly talked to you about it and said, no, look. This is conspiracy theory. We're not like that. We were never like that. It's just propaganda, Others that want to be at top of the ladder, of the hierarchy, so they put out all these theories, all these claims, all these conspiracy theories that were evil, wicked, and trying to take over the world and all this sort of stuff. Look deeper into it. Do the research. Establish the claimed facts, or the facts as claimed. The facts as claimed or established facts. Sorry, we'll put that in better English. Take a look at it, at the different claims, all the claims, and strive to establish those facts as fact. Look at the evidence and see if the evidence proves itself evident, and then look at these writers, these authors, to see if they are infallible, irrefutable, therefore their writings would be deemed irrefutable, infallible. Debunkable, yes, because people can do that and they will, because that's their whole motive, if you put it that way. Rather than point a bony finger and say, ooh, these evil so-and-sos, these wicked so-and-sos, these Satanists, these devils, etc., etc., when we know zero zilch nada about them. We think we do, but we really don't. Okay, so if you liked this video, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, add your comments below. We'll get back to you on those ASAP, or when we can, as soon as possible. And then go share this video with all your family, friends and others, your church friends, temple friends, mosque friends, etc., who may have this finger-pointing, judgmental, attitude, They're the devil, they're this, they're that, because of some conspiracy they've read. Okay? You may come to realise, personally, no, they're not as bad as they're made out to be. They're actually quite good. That's up to the individual, isn't it? Okay. So thank you for taking the time to watch this, our latest video upload. May you be blessed by the Almighty through this video, through this information. Be given a better attitude, more insight, more love for these people, if they are of the evil persuasion, etc. It proves to be like that, because at the end of the day, they are human beings who have probably some hierarchical order that's pumping out all this information, all this falsifications, these evil concepts, etc., etc., according to the theories, the conspiracy theories, whatever. It's not always the person who is the ordinary layman in that particular order, or someone allocated a position. Okay, they're getting it from somewhere else, somewhere higher up, and they're saying, right, this is how it is, believe it, practice it, put it into practice, etc., etc. Or there may be consequences for not conforming to what we dictate, etc., etc., in the form of excommunication, expulsion, threat, lack, deprivation, allegations, accusations, gossip, and so forth.